Thank you for listening to another episode of Tu Tia Bruja. I'm Bex Carlos, your host. Okay, so for today's episode, we're having a conversation about what it's like to be Mexican American, what it's like to be Chicana, and that's not to alienate and it's not to make other folks feel like they aren't included, and we kind of get into that in the discussion because I think that there's been somewhere along the lines, because I've had to correct people, when they say that I'm Latina. And I'm like, oh yeah, I am Latina, but I'm also, Mexican American. And they won't say the word Mexican. And I understand that, when you generalize about any type of Latinx or Latino individual and you automatically assume that they're Mexican, that's fucking racist. That's fucking racist. And, if you didn't know that, now you know. I also acknowledge that a lot of Mexican Americans are super xenophobic to the individuals, Central American and South American places. A lot of Mexicans can be really anti-black, and I'm not here to excuse any of that behavior. I think it's all shitty. I do my part to correct my people, and I would say that if you're Mexican American, I would highly suggest that you make the steps to check family members too. That being said, I think that there's a beautiful place in being Mexican American. I think that Selena complex, as I call it, sometimes I feel like you don't necessarily feel enough for one or necessarily feel enough for the other. But when you get to a point in your life where you're like, fuck you, maybe I like LCD Sound System, but maybe I also like Paquita del Barrio, like when you can live in that space, it's such a great space to be in. So for today's episode, I had Ana Alicia Huerta on. She talks about Danza Azteca, which is a very Chicanx or Chicano form of dance, and she goes into that. She talks about what it's like to have a legacy separate of that of your family members. And we just talk about Santa Muerte, some misunderstandings about her, and just our practices and stuff like that. Enjoy this conversation. Because a lot of us, in making efforts to decolonize, are kind of just taking up things that the ancestors used to do. And so on today's episode, we have Ana Alicia Huerta. Thanks for being on the show.
No problem. I'm super excited. I've really been looking forward to this week.
I'm really excited to hear a little bit about, I know that you've been getting kind of into Danza Azteca.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I would love to, because I've seen it performed before, but I don't even know how one would get into that.
So let's see. I think initially, or I've always really been interested in danza azteca and folklorico ballet. I grew up in the Chicano movement, and every protest or rally or big event or celebration that I attended when I was little always had folklorico dancers and danza azteca. And so it was just something that was always around in my community and was just always understood that ballet folklorico is showing our traditional dances, and Danza Azteca is traditional too, but it's more like prayer and blessings, and we ask them to come perform with us because we want that healing. And I always wanted to do it when I was little, and I just I couldn't find a group. And then I remember being really young and always really wanting to do it, but I grew up in a single parent household with a mom who worked 50, 60-hour weeks, and she was just like, we ain't got time for that. I don't have time to be driving you to dance lessons. So I really didn't get into a group until I was in college, and I went to UC San Diego. In my second year of college there, I saw a Danza Azteca performance, I think for around Christmas time. And I was just like, oh, this is it. This is my chance. I need to go talk to these people. I need to figure out who these people are. And one of the dancers was wearing the águila negra on her traje. And like I said, I grew up in the Chicano movement, so I've always been able to recognize the Águila Negra as somebody that's going to be a resource or a friendlier space for me to go and ask for help and be more vulnerable. So I went up to that person and was just like, I really want to dance. I really want to know how do I get involved? And she was just like, oh, I'm not even really a member of this group, but this group, they practice here on campus. Here, talk to this person. And it was just a group of college students, some of whom had grown up in the dance their entire lives, and some of whom, like me, were brand new to it. And we really were just teaching each other. It was really awesome.
I'm also really jealous because I lived in the Midwest, which is very white. So to be able to have, one, a lot of different events that are centered, the Chicano movement or any kind of like Latinx progression forward is unheard of here. And so I'm just like, my dad really fucked up moving here.
And it's so interesting because I'm born and raised in California, and I live in California now. I came back, but I've lived in New Mexico, I've lived in Seattle, and there really is no other Chicano community like there is in California. Like it's just so strong and so prevalent and so visible. And I remember going to New Mexico and in Seattle. It happened in both places where this conversation comes up right about your identity and what are you. And I have always identified as Chicana and have been like fierce in my identity and maintaining it. And I was always told by other Latinx people, like, "Oh, mija, we don't say that here. That's a bad word." Or like, "Oh, mija, you don't want to do that. You're never going to get a job." And so I had a really hard time finding that community in New Mexico and in Seattle. But then when I moved back to California, it was just like, why did I think that this community was going to exist in other places? Like it's such a California identity because the heart of the movement was here. And so it was just really like a homecoming, like to come back and able to see everybody and know that that community was here and still going strong. And it was so easy to find as opposed to like searching and searching. I joined Danza Azteca groups in New Mexico too, and it just wasn't the same. And I didn't stay in that group for very long, and it just didn't feel like home. And then coming back to California, it took me a little while. I actually just joined my recent group last year, and it was just immediately just so comfortable and so welcoming.
Isn't it interesting? Because there were several places that belonged to Mexico before the US, like, whatever. You know what I mean? But like, I don't want to get all into it. But, there's just certain places that as like Chicanas, we do feel a connection to. Because, so I just went to LA for the first time last year. And that was a place where I was just like, there's something about here that just feels homey and reminiscent. And, like something about me knew it. And I mean, I felt that. I went to Arizona, a couple of years before that, and I felt it there too, but it's different there. This was all Mexican land. And so, like with California, like I feel like there's especially something there because, like you said, the movement was there.
Right, it's home. Like this, at the end of the day, this is my home. This is where I grew up. This is where my parents were born. This is where my grandparents were born. So this is always where we're going to come back to. And I feel like I was stupid to think that I could go and make that home in other states because that was definitely what I was trying to do back in the day when I had just graduated and I was so idealistic and was like, I'm going to make my way in the big city where I didn't know anybody and I didn't have any family. And coming back home, it was just like, oh, what do you need? Like, we got you. Why did you take so long to come back?
Sometimes it really takes us having to realize that for ourselves, though. I guess I've just been thinking about California differently as of late because on a dating app recently, I matched with someone and I was talking to her, and I think I turned her off just because we were having a conversation about being, Chicana. And I was like, oh, yeah, like my family's from Jalisco. Like, where's your family from? And she's like, well, my family's from California, and as far as I know, that they've always been here. So, and I was like, "Oh, sorry." Like,
Yeah, that's definitely a thing that happens too. It's interesting now that I do immigration law and I assist a lot of recently arrived immigrants. But I remember having to make that distinction in my community and your identity as a Chicano, a Chicanx person, like because I think a Chicanx person is inherently an American identity. And that's part of what it is you're acknowledging like this is our land, we've been here forever, right? But it's also a distinction from recently arrived immigrants, and you're acknowledging that you don't share the same history. But what's different is that here in California, it's like, yeah, we don't have the same history, but we're still the same community. And in other places in the Southwest and the Northwest where I was living, it was like just a strong desire of like, no, we are not the same at all. And it was like, con su nopal enfrente, like, you're going to come to me that way? And like, come on, really?
con su nopal enfrente. I love that expression.
Yeah, right? Like that's exactly what it is. Like, really? Come on.
You had mentioned previously when you were in Seattle and you would use Chicana or Chicanx or whatever. It's really difficult, being Chicanas, that like we have to explain to people that it's okay to use the term Mexican. Like, to even have this conversation with people is like, okay, to say Latino or Latina or Latinx, whatever is preferred, is fine. But it's like okay to like be a proud Mexican or Chicana person. It's really unfortunate to not be able to say that, to go to some places and kind of have to be referred to as Latinx. I really do like the term. It is very like inclusive of everybody, but we also do have to remember that we are separate people from separate countries and our struggles are different.
Right. And there are separate identities and separate histories. I think that's also the reason why I don't identify myself as an Indigenous person, even though part of the Chicanx identity is recognizing your indigeneity and reclaiming that indigeneity and exploring it and restoring it. I don't assert an Indigenous identity because I don't share the history with the Native American peoples, the first peoples of this land. Like I don't have that history with them. That's not a shared history. I don't have family members that were sent away to boarding schools. I don't have ancestors that walked the Trail of Tears. So I don't feel that that is a proper identity for me to assert. But that does not mean that I can't explore my own indigeneity through danza.
And I think worth mentioning that the US just separated indigenous people by like north, they're Native Americans, south, they're Mexicans. And that is important to recognize that although we don't share the same experience, we were colonized and we had a lot of stuff happen, and finding the things that are true and finding what fits and paying honor to it. Like I don't feel comfortable assuming an indigenous identity because I don't connect to those roots. Like I know what indigenous groups that I come from. I come from the Cora and the Huichol, and I don't believe that Huichol is even like the preferred term.
I mean, that's more than me. Like, I don't even know. My history that I know is that my grandma's grandma was born in Brownsville, Texas when it was Mexico and we were there. Like, we were part of the first communities there and the border crossed us. And all of a sudden we were Texans.
And it's just people just had to adjust to what life was like after that.
Yeah.
To even have the conversation that Mexicans are indigenous with some people is like mind blowing. And I'm just like, my dude, how are you so unaware?
Yeah, like you're unaware of just like your own country's history, right? And I think that danza, at least for me, allows me a way to connect to that root that's here, at least for me, like that's here in California, that's here to this land, because it's something that I always experienced growing up here. And I mean, I don't know if you know any of the history of danza, but at least in an oral history that I've heard and I've seen written down, at least in one place, that danza came to California because one of the first leaders who came from Mexico to the States to share danza came in the hopes of performing at Disneyland. So, in my opinion and in my experience, danza in the way that I do it is almost inherently a Chicano experience because it's us as Californians or as Americans trying to go back to Aztlan, right? Trying to go back to that land that we had before.
I had a very sad moment. I was in Mexico earlier this year, in Mexico City, and I was like flying down. And I just got really sad looking at all the clouds because they say that when Cortez came to what would have been Mexico City, like it was like this beautiful cloud, and it was just like the most beautiful thing ever. And I don't know, there's just something really sad about the fact that we'll never be able to see a lot of the amazing things that our ancestors did, but they are always with us. With danza, it's like a form of embodying both parts of you, because that to me is something that's hard, that duality of like never being enough of one and never being enough of the other. Selena complex, you know what I mean?
Right, right. Danza allows me a space. This is not the first time that I've expressed this or explained it either. Is danza allows me a space where all the components of my identity can come together. Because in the community that I grew up in Kern County, California, it's a very conservative county, a very racist county, and so you're like identified as an other, right? And then me and my family, we're just so fierce in our identities and like holding to it that we're not making the like issue better, right? We're asserting ourselves in a way that's going to make us stand out. And then my grandma is Dolores Huerta, one of the leaders of the movement. And so I'm always connected to identities that aren't necessarily mine. So it's either this identity of being othered or this identity of Dolores Huerta's granddaughter, which is taking away my own accomplishments, or this identity of just an immigration lawyer because our organization is the only organization in Kern County that provides nonprofit immigration services. So like then, or I'm just an immigration lawyer, I'm just a lawyer. And so there isn't really a space for me to like gather all of those things together and be like the best version of myself that I can be in unity, right? When I started doing danza, at least here locally, I really found that that's where that could take place, that there wasn't an expectation of I had to be a great lawyer or I had to be a great Chicana lawyer or I had to be a great vision of my grandmother's legacy. I was able to just be a danzante and carry the strength of those struggles into the dance with me and share them. People take up those burdens with me and have other people carry that weight with me and not have to do it by myself. And then be appreciated just for showing up to the dance, right? Not because of something that I've done or somebody else has done. And like you're appreciated just for putting in effort and energy and participating in the ceremony. Such a grounding practice, you know, the rhythm of it. We're always burning sage, and so the cleansing of it. And then my group is mostly women. I think we maybe have like 2 men who dance with us. So it's a very feminine energy of other activist women who do other things in our community as well. And so it's a space where we all get to come together and kind of like it's also an idea of like working out and like aerobics and you're getting out all the stress and all the anxiety and you're just like dancing it out the same as you would in like running on a treadmill or going to a spin class, right? You get that adrenaline rush. But at the end of the ceremony, we always do like a gratitude circle where everybody gets a space to go around and say what you're thankful for and maybe put some prayers out into the universe and ask the circle to join you in prayer. And there's no limit on like how long you need, or even if you have to say something, like you can choose to not say anything. There's no distinction of like you have to pray to a Christian God. Some people do pray to a Christian God or a Catholic God. I myself pray to just the creator or the universe or Tonantzin because I work closely with Tonantzin. And so there's no judgment and it's everybody just kind of putting out your raw energy and receiving validation for that energy and receiving support.
Yeah. Have you ever worked with Santa Muerte?
I have not. And you know, when I first started really focusing on working with deities, which was really, really recently, I used to really only work with my ancestors, specifically my grandmothers, like keeping the relationship alive with my grandmothers or other family members that have passed. Like those were the spirits that I would call upon and seek guidance from. And so when I started incorporating deities into my practice, I incorporated Tonantzin because I've always grown up with like, you know, the statues of like the Virgen de Guadalupe. And that was a way for me to unite my religious upbringing and where I'm at now in my spirituality.
Taking a quick pause from the episode, Halloween is inching closer and closer, and I hope that you have all of the tools that you need so that you're not worrying at last minute to go grab a candle here or, ask for a reading there. Be sure and reach out, make your appointments to anybody that you're working with. Someone that I'm working with and always work with is Melissa at Temperance Home and Bar. First of all, Melissa's amazing. Melissa and I, not only are we partners in bringing this, production together, but she is also a friend of mine. And when I go through things that really just shock me, even, like I feel like life is something that brings me a lot of twists and turns, for better or for worse. But I can just suggest how, I'm hurt and how I'm trying to deal with something or process something. And automatically, a couple of days later, boom, a package just shows up. So, what I'm saying is, if you want to work with someone who cares about you as a person and doesn't just care about the money that you're providing them, please check out Melissa at Temperance Home and Bar. She does amazing work and she's going to find something really cool to help you on your spiritual journey and to just like help cleanse you of anything that you might be holding on to. Let's get back into the episode.
When I got involved in politics, there's actually a lot of things happening behind the scenes in politics. And so I had one person that I would talk to all the time who had worked on different campaigns in DC. And she would tell me stories about how people would make offerings to Santa Muerte for political success. And she just really cautioned me because she said Santa Muerte will always give you what you ask for, but you're going to have to sacrifice something in return. And so I wasn't, and I still don't feel strong enough to do that in a good way. Like, I'm more scared of what I'm going to have to sacrifice than what I would get.
I mean, I pray to Santa Muerte, and I do think that a lot of her, what she stands for and what people think of her has been kind of dramatized a lot. Like, I don't see her as a vengeful spirit, and I pray to her and I leave stuff out for her and stuff, but I don't necessarily feel like it's like a transactional. If anything, I feel like for me, she's all about ending cycles and helping me heal.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's like with any deity, it's like you
Or you get what you put in, right? Like,
yeah, you get what you put in because it's like if you are wanting to, conquer your enemies and do all this stuff and like be the baddest of the bad, yeah, I'm sure she could help you with that. But for me and what I wish for, I guess, I'm just like, I just want death to things that don't benefit me anymore. Because like life is too short to be in cycles and to be finding yourself in the same patterns that you were in like, your early 20s. Eventually we got to grow up. She's been very healing and just letting go of a lot of things that no longer benefit me. When I was in Mexico, there were all these like signs that she was like around me and supporting me. Her feast day, well, she has two of them, and one of them is, I want to say it's the first day of Dia de los Muertos, so November 1st. And then the other one is August 15th, which is the day after my birthday. So I don't know. I've always been really connected to death. I talked about this in a previous episode. Like the guy next to my apartment died and he hung out in my apartment afterwards because he was in there for like 11 days. It was really gross. But like, you know what I mean? Like, and so it's like for me, when I really started to renounce what I jokingly called the false god. When I started to renounce all that, like I feel like Santa Muerte was there welcoming me with open arms because she's like, you don't have to keep doing this white people bullshit. And yeah, and so like for me, it's all about cutting ties with like the parts of myself that I don't identify with anymore.
mm-hmm.
But you get what you put in. So
Right. Yeah. I've been interested and I have done a little bit of research and explored, but I just haven't made that step yet. I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm still intimidated.
I don't know. It's definitely worth it. I don't know. I like connecting to things that like feel right. And she's always just felt right. And I've never got like a malicious thing. I try and use my magic to like really just kind of create some balance in the universe and create justice where there isn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think my practice, or I like to believe that my practice is focused more on healing and just like doing my best to make things better. Especially because like in the work that I do, people just come to you with so much trauma and they're escaping different things, right? And so I really look at even my practice as a lawyer as a way of like trying to give them a fresh start and healing some of that trauma and working through it. But first, we got to go through this terrible, terrible, fucked up system. It's so fucked up, and it's such a mind fuck. Like sometimes I have to sit back and really look at this system that is just made to be against people of color and including like, and I feel like including myself, like I myself as a woman of color and putting myself in a space in a system that's just made to work against me. But that's also where my privilege comes in that I've had the privilege, to go to school and receive the education to the point that I was able to receive a law degree. And so now I get to use that privilege for other people going through that space who would otherwise be unguided and unrepresented.
Yeah. I feel like healers come in all types. And you're kind of in a space where we really need it the most because, like you said, the law was created to hurt people of color. The law is working exactly the way it's supposed to work. And until we have enough people who can really break it down and explain it to those who don't, it's going to kind of be the same thing over and over. We got to find the loopholes and the ways to be protected because
Right.
they're there.
Yeah. Just having danza, I haven't been able to practice lately. They were doing the practices on Zoom, and just after so many Zoom meetings every day, you know, at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, I'm zoomed out. Like, I can't stare at this computer screen anymore. And I know that they've just started doing the circle again in person not too long ago, but I had to recently go get tested, and so I didn't want to like participate until I was sure of what my results were. And so like these things are definitely affecting my spirituality and my practice. I'm feeling disconnected from my circle and a little ungrounded, but I think like we're all ungrounded in these topsy-turvy times that we're living in. So even just trying to do a little bit of just like, I work from home, so now my work is home with me and I can't escape it.
Do you have something to help remove the negative energy? Like, do you have like a pink Himalayan salt lamp, or do you have any type of like protection?
So I use sage that's been gifted to me in sweat ceremony, and then I have like my essential oils and a diffuser that I use to kind of move the air about. And I open it's fucking hot here. It's like 110 fucking degrees. So I wake up early in the morning at like 5:30 and like try to open the doors and like try to get fresh air in to make sure that the air is not being stagnant and that energy is just sitting, you know? And I sage my office, the room that I'm using as an office. I sage that room quite frequently, like just that room alone.
Well, I will say that if you can find ethically sourced Palo Santo, switch to that because that specifically removes negative energy, whereas like the sage removes all of the energy.
Yeah.
So, if you're feeling really heavy, that might be a switch to try.
Like it's a mind fuck to not have a separate space for those things, especially because they affect me so much. Like I get so emotionally invested in my cases and I have to go to therapy. Like I have a therapist that I see to help work with me on like anxieties and boundaries and letting things go, and to have it just like in my home now and not be able to lock it up in an office and drive away, you know, it's just it adds to, I feel like it adds to the chaos feeling that we're all living in. Like we're all feeling like we're living in persistent chaos and we don't know what's going to happen one day or the next. And I feel like that's just like adding to it in my house. And I'm just like, ah, make it stop.
Oh, I bet. I was lucky to be working from home before all this happened. So creating a space to have that work energy in separate is really essential. And I mean, like I edit podcasts. You're dealing with much more intense stuff. So that stuff's hard. It's really hard. And if you're someone who's getting really emotionally invested, you want to do as much as you can, but you're one spirit in a human body. You can only do so much as that human body can do.
Right. I definitely like practice like shielding meditations. And that's why I rely on Tonantzin a lot, because I feel like she helps protect me and helps me keep my boundaries strong and keep my shield strong when I need to. And so if I feel that like I'm getting too heavy or I'm carrying things longer in my day than I should be, right? I'm not able to let them go when I'm trying to relax and stuff, then I'll like ask Tonantzin for help to help me like create that clear boundary line and put those things down for a minute. And that's where I feel that she's more useful to me. And that's what our relationship is, that she is my protector. And then I call on my grandmothers, who are my backup. So like before going into court, I try to do a small visualization of like calling on my grandmothers and that strength and moving forward, because I come from a line of strong women and I know that they would be proud of me. And I actually had a vision of them one time in sweat ceremony when I think it was within the first year that I had started doing this work. And I had a vision of being in the courtroom in front of the judge. And I was like by myself, because this was something that had been stuck in my head, that like you go into a courtroom and you're the only one. And then there's this like talking point that we repeat when we're doing news interviews in our community, that we're the only organization, that I am one of two attorneys in this community doing this work. And so it kind of reinforces this idea of like, I'm the only one, I'm the only one who can do this. And so in my vision, I was in the courtroom and I was in front of the judge, and I had passed the barrier. I don't know if you've ever been into a courtroom, but there's always like a little bar, kind of like a little fence separating where people sit, and like defendants would sit and stuff, people who are all in the courtroom or people who are observing, and like the attorneys and the people who are having their case heard. There's a little barrier there, and that's where the term passing the bar comes from, is that you're allowed access into the well of the courtroom past the bar. And so in my vision, I was like going through this little barrier. It's like a little door that's like waist high. And so I was like going through the little door to like go take my seat at counsel table. And I was the only one, like I didn't have a client with me. I was the only one in front of the judge. But I had all of my grandmothers and my ancestors behind me, even the ones that I didn't know and I didn't recognize. They were all behind me in the back on the other side of the bar. And it was just like a realization that I and my family and my generation of cousins, I am the only one that's an attorney. And in my community, I am like one of two attorneys doing this work, but I'm not the only one. Like I'm not alone, right?
That's so powerful.
Yeah, it felt really good. And it felt really good to like have that and to realize that, and to keep that with me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and just talking about danza and just all of the different things that you do. Where can the listeners support you, support, any kind of efforts that are really on your mind right now?
Like shameless plug, we're the UFW Foundation, and we're a nonprofit organization, and we operate on donations and other fundraising efforts. So like that is a way to directly support the work that we do. And like I said, we're the only nonprofit organization in Kern County, which is one of the biggest agricultural areas of the United States. We have one of the largest immigrant populations in the United States. So that's here. And we're the only organization offering nonprofit services in this area. Also, donating to local bond funds. So, like, look in your area. If you're close to an immigration detention center, there is likely a local bond fund close to you. And even just a $10, $20 donation goes directly to helping somebody get released. Because most often people get assigned bonds that are maybe $3,000, $4,000 at their lowest. And these are recently arrived asylum seekers who may not have many connections here to the States. And even if they do, those connections are often recently arrived immigrants themselves. And I've seen bonds as high as $50,000, So it's like somebody can be released from detention tomorrow, but they just need to pay this bond. So that is a way to directly help the community.
Awesome. We'll include all those links in the show notes on how people can do that. And thank you again for being on.
Thank you so much. This was great.
All right, and that was the episode. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned something. I hope that it was informative, and I hope that, if you are not someone who is part of the Latinx, Latino, or Mexican community, that you might understand a little bit more clearly that everybody's identity is different. You know what I mean? And everybody's identity and where they stand is valid. So may we all be working on a process to align and find what works best for us and, find labels to express who and what we are. So again, thank you so much for listening. If you want to keep up with the podcast, be sure and follow on Instagram and Twitter on Tu Tia Bruja. If you want to follow me, I'm at Bexby Caston. And my website, bexbycaston.com, has a Tu Tia Bruja tab, and you can find a little bit more about the show there. There's also a tab on where to listen. So if you're confused or, maybe you're getting rid of Spotify and you want to find something new, please check that out. And before I leave, I highly, highly ask that if you have a moment to spare, please log on to iTunes and rate and review. Those really, really matter, and I would really highly appreciate it. All right, thank you so much. Until next time, bye.